Hi everyone, welcome back to JOAN of ARC. If you hear any snoring in the background, it's not Dougal this time. This time it's Lola. Anyway, so, Paladin in his glory. We were doomed to suffer tedious waits and delays, and we settled ourselves down to our fate and bore it with dreary patience, counting the slow hours and the dull days, and hoping for a turn when God should please to send it. The Paladin was the only exception, that is to say. He was the only one who was happy and had no heavy times. This was partly owing to the satisfaction he got out of his clothes. He bought them at second-hand, a Spanish cavalier's complete suit, a wide-brimmed hat with flowing plumes, lace collar and cuffs, faded velvet doublet and trunks, a short cloak hung from his shoulder, a funnel-topped buskin's long rapier, and all that, a graceful and picturesque costume. And the Paladin's great frame, well, it was just right place to hang for its effect. He wore it when off duty, and when he swaggered by, with one hand resting on the hilt of his rapier, and twirling his new moustache with the other, everybody stopped to look and admire. And well they might, for he was fine and stately contrast in the small French gentleman of the day, squeezed into the trivial French costume of the time. He was King B of the village, and the little village, of course, that smuggled under the shelter of the frowning towers and bastions of Courdray Castle, and acknowledged lord of the tap-room of the inn. When he opened his mouth there, he got a hearing. Those simple artisans and peasants listened with deep and wondering interest, for he was a traveller, he'd seen the world, and all of it that lay between Chinon and Domremy, at any rate. Not the world, let's say, but that's not what he told people, and that was a wide stretch, more of it than they might ever hope to see. And he had been in battle, and knew how to paint its shock and struggle, its perils and surprises, with an art that was all his own. He was cock of that walk, hero of the Tolstoy. He drew customers' honey draws flies. So he was the pet of the innkeeper and of his wife and daughter, and they were his obliged and willing servants. Most people who have the narrative gift, that great and rare endowment, have with it the defect of telling their choice things over the same way every time, and this injures them and causes them to sound stale and wearisome after several repetitions. But it was not so with the Paladin, whose art was of a finer sort. It was more stirring and interesting to hear him tell about a battle in 10th time when it was the first time, because he did not tell it twice the same way, but always made a new battle of it, probably a better one as well, more casualties on the enemy's side each time, more general wreck and disaster all around, and more widows, more orphans, more suffering in the neighbourhood where it happened. He could not tell his battles apart himself, except by the names. By the time he had told one of then 10 times, it had grown so that there wasn't room enough in France for it any more, but was lapping over the edges. But up to that point the audience would not allow him to substitute a new battle, knowing that the old ones were the best, and sure to improve as long as France could hold them. And so, instead of saying to him, as they would have said to another, "Give us something fresh, we're fatigued from the old thing," they would say with one voice and with a strong interest, "Tell about the surprise at Beaulieu again. Tell it 3 or 4 times." That is a compliment which few narrative experts ever heard in their entire lifetime. Paladin had a thing for that. He could really talk. At first, when Paladin heard us tell about the glories of royal audience, he was broken-hearted, because he was not taken with us to it. Next, his talk was full of what he would have done if he had been there, and within 2 days he was telling what he did do when he was there. His mill was fairly started now, and could be trusted to take care of its affair. Within 3 nights afterwards all his battles were taking a rest, for already his worshippers in the tap-room were so infatuated with a great deal of the royal audience that they would have nothing else, and so besotted with it were they that they would have cried if they could not have gotten it. Noel Regison hid himself and heard it, and came out and told me. And after that we went together to listen, bribing the inn hostess to let us have a little private parlour where we could stand at the wickets in the door, just to see and hear what Mr. Paladin was up to now. He's always up to something. The tap-room was large, yet had a snug and cosy look, with its inviting little tables, chairs scattered irregularly over its red brick floor. Its great fire was flaming and crackling in the wide chimney. It was a comfortable place to be in on such a chilly and blustering March nights as these were, and a goodly company had taken shelter there, and they were sipping their wine in contentment and gossiping with one another, and in a neighbourly way, but they were waiting for the historian. The host, the hostess, and their pretty daughter were flying here and there and yonder among the tables, doing their best to keep up with the orders. The room was about 40 feet square, and a space or aisle down the centre of it had been kept vacant and reserved for the Paladin's needs. At the end of it was a platform 10 or 12 feet wide, with a big chair and a small table on it, and 3 steps leading up to it. Among the wine slippers were many familiar faces: the cobbler, the farrier, the blacksmith, the wheelwright, the armourer, the maltster, the weaver, the baker, the miller's man with his dusty coat, and so on, and conscious and important as a matter of course was the barber surgeon, for he was in all villages, and he has to pull everybody's teeth and purge and bleed all the grown people on a month to keep the health sound. He knows everybody, and by constant contact with all sorts of folk becomes a master of etiquette and manners and a conversationalist of large facility. There were plenty of carriers, drovers and the sort, and journeymen, artisans. When the Paladin presently came sauntering indolently in, I think it's meant to say idly, but it says indolently in, he was received with a cheer, and the barber hustled forward and greeted him with several low, most graceful and courtly bows, also taking his hand and touching his lips to it. Then he called in a loud voice for a stoup of wine for the Paladin. And when the host's daughter brought it up on the platform and dropped a curtsy and departed, the barber called after her and told her to add the wine to his score. This won him ejaculations of approval, which pleased him very much and made his little rat eyes shine, and such applause is right and proper, for when we do a liberal and gallant thing, it is but natural that we should wish to see notice taken of it. The barber called upon the people to rise and drink the Paladin's health, and they did it with alacrity and affectionate heartiness, clashing their metal flagons together with a simultaneously crash, crash, crash here, there, and over there, and heightening the effect with a resounding hooray, hooray, hooray. It was a fine thing to see how that young swashbuckler had made himself so popular in a strange land in so little a while, without others' helps as well to his advancement, than just his tongue and talent given to him by God. A talent that was but 1 talent in the beginning, but was now become 10 through husbandry, and the increment and usufruct that do naturally follow that and reward it by law. The people sat down. They began to hammer on the tables with the flagons. Call for the king's audience, call for the king's audience, the king's audience, the king's audience, they said. The Paladin stood there in one of the best attitudes, with his plumed great hat tipped over to the left, the folds of his short cloak drooping from his shoulder, and the one hand resting upon the hilt of his rapier, and the other lifting his beaker. As the noise died down, he made a stately sort of bow, which he had picked up somewhere, then fetched his beaker with a sweep to his lips and tilted his head back and drained it to the bottom. The barber jumped up for it and set it upon the Paladin's table. Then the Paladin began to walk up and down his platform with a great deal of dignity and quite at ease, and as he walked he talked, and every little while stopped and stood facing his house, and so standing continued his talk. You know, guys, the Paladin, what he is a performer. He's an entertainer, and he's a very damn good one as well. That should not go unnoticed. He's definitely an entertainer, and you know, I praise him for that. It's not easy at all. We went 3 nights in succession. It was plain there was a charm about the performance that was apart from the mere interest which attaches to lying, unfortunately. It was presently discoverable that this charm lay in the Paladin's sincerity. He was not lying consciously. He actually believed what he was saying. He believed it. To him, his initial statements were facts, and whenever he enlarged a statement, the enlargement became a fact too. He put his heart into his extravagant narrative, just as a poet puts into his heart into an heroic fiction, and his earnestness disarmed criticism, disarmed it as far as he himself was concerned. Nobody believed his narrative, but all believed that he believed it. That's the difference. He made his enlargements without flourish, without emphasis, and so casually that often one failed to notice that a change had been made. He spoke of the governor of Vaucouleurs the first night, simply as the governor of Vaucouleurs. He spoke of him the second night as his uncle, the governor of Vaucouleurs, the third night as his bloody father. I mean, come on, we're going down lines here. He did not seem to know what he was making these extraordinary changes. No, they dropped from his lips in quite a natural and effortless way. By his first night's account, the governor merely attached him to the maid's military escort in a general and unofficial way. The second night, his uncle, the governor, sent him with the maid as lieutenant of rear guard. The third night, his father, the governor, put the whole command maid at all in his special charge. The first night, the governor spoke of him as a youth without name or ancestry, but destined to achieve both. The second night, his uncle the governor spoke of him as the latest and worthiest lineal descendant of the chiefest and noblest of the 12 paladins of Charmagin. The third night he spoke of him as the lineal descendant of the whole dozen. In 3 nights he promoted the Count of Vendôme from a fresh acquaintance to a schoolmate, then a brother-in-law. At the king's audience everything grew in the same way. First 4 silver trumpets, then, well, there were 12, then 45, and finally there were 96. There were only 4. I don't think he mentioned the 4. There were meant to be 4 and he mentioned, I'm pretty sure, when I remember rightly, he said there were 12, 35 and then 96. By the time he had thrown in so many drums and syllables that he had to lengthen the hall from the 500 feet to 900 to accommodate them. Well, of course he did. If you're going to enhance the trumpets, you've got to enhance the size of the hall. Under his hand, the people presently multiplied in the same large way. The first 2 nights he contented himself merely describing and exaggerating the chief dramatic incident of the audience. The third night he added illustration to the description. He throned the barber in his own high chair to represent a sham king. Then he told how the court watched the maid with intense interest and suppressed merriment, expecting to see her fooled by the deception and get herself swept permanently out of credit by the storm of scornful laughter which would follow. He worked this scene up till he got his house in a burning fever of excitement and anticipation. Then came the climax. Turning to the barber, he said, "But mark you what she said. She gazed steadfastly upon the sham's villain face, as I now gaze upon yours, this being her noble and simple attitude, just as I stand now." Then turned she thus to me, and stretching her arm out so and pointed with her finger, she said, in that firm, calm tone which she used to use in directing the conduct of battle, "Pluck me this false knave from the throne." "Aye," said the Paladin, striding forward, as I do now. I took him by the collar, I lifted him up, and I held him aloft. Thus, if he had been but a child, the house rose shouting, stamping, hanging with the flagons, and, well, went fairly mad over this magnificent exhibition of strength, and there was not the shadow of laugh anywhere, though the spectacle of the limp but proud barber hanging there in the air like a puppy held by the scruff of its neck was a thing that had nothing of, well, solemnity about it. Then I set him down upon his feet, thus being minded to get him by better hold and heave him up out the window. But she bid no, she said forbear, for that error he escaped with his life, but she forbid me. Then she turned her about, and viewed the throng with those eyes of hers, which are clear shining windows, whence her immortal wisdom looketh out upon the world, resolving its falsities, and coming at the kernel of truth that it hid within them, and presently they fell upon a young man modestly clothed, and him she proclaimed for what he truly was, saying, I am thy servant, thou art the king. All were astonished, and great shout went up, the whole 6,000 joining in, so that the walls rocked with the volume and tumult of it. He made a fine and picturesque thing of the march out from the audience, augmentating the glories of it to the last limit of the impossibilities. Then he took from his finger and held up a brass nut from a bald head, which the head ostler at the castle had given him that morning, and made his conclusion thus. Then the king dismayed the maid most graciously, as indeed was her desert, and turning to me said, Take this signet ring, son of the Paladins, and command me with it in your day of need. And look you, said he, touching my temple, preserve this praying. France has no use for it, and look well to its caskets also, for I foresee that it will be hooped with the ducal coronal one day. I took the ring and knelt and kissed his hand, saying, Sire, where glory calls, there will I be found. Where danger and death are thickest, that is my native air. When France and throne need help, well, I say nothing, for I am not of the talking sort. Let my deeds speak for me, is all I ask. So ended the most fortunate and memorable episode, so big with the future weal for the crown and the nation, and unto God be the thanks. Rise, fill your flagons, now to France and the King. Drink, drink, drink. They emptied them to the bottom. They burst into cheers and huzzas and kept it up as much as 2 minutes. The Paladin standing a stately ease the while and smiling benignantly from his platform. Oh, how we enjoyed these performances. Okay, so if you remember the last time I told you is where they went to the palace, and she did obviously spot out the false king, but I'm sure you can pretty much remember that he definitely never removed said false king from the throne. He definitely was never given a ring from the said king to be. But it's not that. I think it's about the way he brings it forward. He's an entertainer. He, he's not saying anything bad either. It's not like, he's not like criticising others. He's not saying anything bad. He's just entertaining people. So that's why they let him be. He is their friend when all's said and done. And they know it's not the truth, but it's the entertainment value. And can you fault that? I mean, imagine put yourself in France, right, in this position. Put yourself as a commoner in France. You sat in the pub. Life is so dreary because England's taking over and you just don't know what's going to happen. You do have nowhere to go, right? All of a sudden, this crusade comes through. And with this crusade is someone who's going to save France. Save France because God says so. Imagine how they would feel. And then when the Paladin starts telling his stories, just imagine the hope it would bring in their hearts. That's all it takes, to bring that hope into one's heart. And that's why I love the Paladin. Okay, he lies. He lies a lot. But they're not lies that hurt anyone. He's such an entertainer. He's brilliant at what he does. I'm going to leave this episode here, guys, because I got way too excited about that. I don't know why. But when we come back, we're going to head over to while Joan persuades us her inquisitors. Because she does have inquisitors, and she must persuade them that she's true and she's of God, and not a witch working for the devil. So yeah, thank you for listening, and many blessings.